Dodge this.
One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of DTRH. It is July 13th, 2016. On tonight's live edition, I am glad to be welcoming to the broadcast for the first time an author who should have been on months and months and months ago, but due to life getting in the way and one thing after another, we've had to shift around a little bit. But actually, I'm kind of glad that happened. Now, why would I say that? I say that because it enabled me to do a little bit more reading of his book. Normally, I only get a chance, and, you know, I've said this on there, normally when I have a guest on, especially if I'm going to have them on and I only get their book like a week before they're going to be on, I have to kind of speed read through it. And I have to end up going back later and reading it again. A lot of times I'll even try to find the book on Audible, if I can, and listen to the audiobook version of it as well a couple times. And that is, a lot of times for me, especially if I'm doing multiple things, I can listen to much easier. But in this case, in tonight's case, I actually not only had a PDF copy of the book, but I purchased myself a physical copy of the book. And I actually got a chance to read the book. And I got to tell you, I'm very impressed with the author's work, and I'm just super excited to have him on. So I don't want to waste any more time because tonight's going to be a show filled with a ton of information, ladies and gentlemen. When I tell you that, that's not hyperbole either. I literally mean the amount of info that's going to be thrown at you tonight. It probably make your brain melt, to quote Joe Joseph, as Joe used to say. Well, I want you to take notes, as always. Don't believe what myself or the author says just because we say it. I actually challenge you to go do the research yourself, and you too will be surprised if you already don't know this. Many of you already know some of the stuff, some of the things we're going to talk about, not all of it. And that's why I like this book. So, without further ado, let me bring to the airwaves the author of Hidden History. And the book's actually got a kind of a long subtitle, and I want to read you the whole thing. Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics by Donald Jeffries. Now, Donald has been researching the JFK assassination since the mid-1970s. He was a teenage volunteer for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry. And since then, he's been investigating the JFK assassination, which obviously has led him down the rabbit hole, so to speak. If you actually take a look at his book, you'll be amazed at how far into the rabbit hole he goes. He published his first book, the acclaimed 2007 novel, The Unreals, And this new book, Hidden History, is actually his first nonfiction book. So I want to pick his brain on so many things, including what got him into this. But first, let me bring him live to the broadcast. Donald Jeffries, my friend, welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for writing this book. And I said this to you a couple times off air already, and I actually sincerely mean that as a book nerd myself, a big, huge one, and a fan of literature and conspiracy and knowledge itself and hidden history. This book is absolutely amazing, even for the seasoned researcher, because there's stuff in here about things that even the seasoned researcher, people have been doing this 15, 20 years, can learn a thing or two. Just amazing work, sir.
Well, I really appreciate the kind words.
And they're wholesome and they're real. I mean, this, like, you touch on things, we're going to get into things tonight, like Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. People are going to go, oh, wasn't he just drunk? No. No, there's more to it. That's why the book's called Hidden History. So, before we get into it, I want you to plug the book really quick, shamelessly. If there's any websites, Twitter accounts, or anything, and where's the best place for people to purchase a copy of it?
Well, you can get it. Amazon is always nice because all authors look at those Amazon rankings, and reviews are always welcome too. But you can get it from the publisher, Skyhorse Publishing. It's in most Barnes & Noble stores. I blog very frequently or regularly at donaldjeffries.wordpress.com, so you can read my up-to-date rants on various subjects there. I kind of blog about lots of different issues. I keep up with the politics that are going on right now and social issues, and I write some things about history too. And my upcoming book will be published next spring in 2017 called Survival of the Richest, which is more focused on the disparity of wealth and the corruption of the marketplace. And I'll be including a couple chapters from that book, as I did with Hidden History, that didn't make it into the published version on my blog, so people can get some extra information there.
Awesome. So, ladies and gentlemen, follow all his stuff. And throughout the show, I'm going to have you shamelessly plug any websites and stuff like that. And again, one more time, where's the best spot to get the book?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in Barnes & Noble stores or online, at Amazon. The publisher is Skyhorse Publishing, Books A Million. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, you Google my name and Hidden History, and you'll find a bunch of stuff.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, the full title of the book is Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. And boy, is it ever. So, let's start with the obligatory question, right? Mine's going to be a little bit deeper version of this. I want to know what made you write this book, but what interests me even further is the fact that you were a volunteer for Mark Lane at such a very young age. So before we get into the obligatory question of, Donald, what made you write the book? What made you join voluntarily Mark Lane's investigation?
Well, I became very political during the Watergate hearings. As a matter of fact, I was a teenager in high school, and I was just pretty much your standard liberal Democrat. I voted for Jimmy Carter in 1976. It's my first vote. Big fan of the Kennedys. I still maintain some love for the Kennedys, but after Watergate, I've read a few books on the Kennedy assassination. I'd always admired the Kennedys, and I never really had gone there before. And once I started, there was no going back. I mean, I was just obsessed with it. I read, virtually every book on the subject, especially in the early days. I knew Mark Lane was relatively close to me. His office was in Washington, D.C. I lived in the Northern Virginia suburbs, and so I became the co-chairman of the local chapter in my area. And as I described in the book, I had a memorable meeting with him at his office one day. Mark Lane was a hero to me. He just died, I think, last month or something. So he was what I call one of the old civil libertarians, which I like to consider myself a civil libertarian. And there's not too many people like that today on the left or the right, but Mark Lane was, and he was like my hero. I love to hear him talk about it. And the conspiracy seemed so obvious to me that I naively assumed that I could talk to the local media people, which I tried to do, and write letters to the editor. Of course, this was long before the internet, and I could clearly just say, "Hey, you don't," as if they didn't know about this stuff, and they would go after it, just like Woodward and Bernstein had exposed Watergate. But really opened my eyes afterwards, and I realized, wow, Watergate was an anomaly. And that's one of the things about the book you'll notice is that really I don't talk much about Watergate, and Nixon actually comes off pretty well compared to most of the other presidents, because I found that anything that happened in his administration was pretty much child's play compared to most of the other ones.
Right, and you got to wonder, when you look into Watergate, did they set Tricky Dicky up on purpose because he knew too much? And he was, I've heard rumors that he was looking into the Kennedy assassination himself, although he, his connections to Operation 40 and this, all the black ops that were going on during Eisenhower's administration and, from World War II on up. There's so much connections and so many things. It just makes you wonder, did he know too much? Was he pissing off the wrong people? Things like that have a tendency not to happen unless somebody in power sets that in motion. I know it's hard to believe for people, but the reality of the situation is very much so like House of Cards, that show over on Netflix. It's actually when you watch that, it's actually very accurate. Sometimes hard to forget you're watching a drama and not a documentary.
Yeah, well, and I think that, as I noted, what really had an impression on me, and even more in retrospect now, is what an anomaly the Watergate investigation was, and the way the press acted during Watergate. I mean, Dan Rather. At that time, I really didn't even know Dan Rather's history, that he really became a nationally known reporter with his work and, the JFK assassination, where he distorted the truth like every other mainstream media journalist did at that time. But, he was grilling Nixon at the press conference and excited me because I thought, wow, that's what a journalist, this is a Lois Lane type thing. This is what I'm expecting of journalists. And Woodward and Bernstein, I even thought, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to be that kind of a journalist, a muckraker. But as it turned out, when I saw how they, continued, Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather and all these guys, these specials that CBS News had about the Kennedy assassination, they had one in 1967, another one in 1975, and it was just a Warren Commission rehash. And having already studied the information in depth as I had, I realized how much they were lying to us, and that's what really opened my eyes. And I said, wow, this is amazing. And then. At that point, I was really mainly interested in just the Kennedy assassination, but I ordered a book through the mail. I was ordering books through the mail all the time because these books weren't generally in bookstores back then. And it was called None Dare Call a Conspiracy. And I thought it was about the Kennedy assassination. As it turned out, it was written by Gary Allen, and it was a far right-wing book talking about the Council of Foreign Relations, and it opened a whole new door to me. So then suddenly I went from the far left to the far, and that's kind of where I am now. I'm on the far left and the far right. I'm all over the place. But I started seeing, wow, this stuff is really going on. And from there, I started reading about the Federal Reserve and just so many other things. And I'd already studied the RFK assassination, and as you mentioned, Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. And then later, I think one of the most important chapters of my book is the chapter on the what I think is the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr., because no one had really looked into that yet. And so, I mean, and that's what happens. When you start realizing they can kill a president of the United States in the broad daylight, and none of our institutions acted the way, as a youngster, you expect them to act. You expect journalists to investigate it. You expect them to ask questions. You expect our government officials to honestly investigate it. And when I saw how they all acted, from the Dallas Police to the FBI to the Secret Service to the CIA to the Justice Department to the new president, Lyndon Johnson, to every mainstream media journalist pretty much in the country, it really, really made me cynical, and I started realizing, wow, this is as good as you should know about rabbit holes. I don't know how far this thing goes.
So that's what led you to eventually write this magnificent piece of literature that is Hidden History?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's to be honest, I never thought. I knew I had a Kennedy assassination book in me, but there's so many books out there, and I didn't want to just write that. And I had become really kind of a little disappointed in my fiction, because I had the Unreals published. I still consider myself primarily a novelist, and I try to write even my nonfiction. I think a couple people said the novelist keeps coming out in the way I write. And it's just, what I think I am, but it's a little harder to get that published, and I've had a couple other novels I've been peddling for a while, and so I just said, let me do what I do best, and I just I had all these notes for years. A lot of this stuff goes way back. I used to, whenever, especially before the internet, whenever I would read a book, and I was reading constantly then, and it was mostly on these kinds of subjects. So if I'd read a book about Oklahoma City or Waco or any of the other subjects that are in this book, I would keep a file, an old WordPerfect file in those days, and I would just kind of, the stuff that I thought was the most interesting parts of the book, I would just put in this master file. So I had a lot of this stuff there already. I have, a library full of Kennedy assassination books and books on lots of other subjects. So the sources were already there, and plus I had my own experience, working with Mark Lane and also being on the forums over there on the internet and getting a little bit of a name in that community because I've posted regularly. People can find my posts going back, 15 years or more about the JFK assassination. So I had a lot of information, so it wasn't that hard to put it all together and add things and then update it. I mean, I added a postscript because the conspiracies keep coming, as you know. It's hard to get one of these books up to date exactly as it's published because things are constantly happening, especially with the Obama scandals. There was one after the other, so that's why we added a postscript at the end to try to make it a little more up to date. But there's the information overload is amazing, and at this point, like I said, I don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes, but I don't trust much of anything, and it's gotten to the point where if any story appears on the mainstream media, if it's on television being covered, I just assume it's fake or at least very distorted.
Agreed. You end up becoming jaded like that. And that's why I said that I actually used the word magnificent to describe the book. And I said to you off air, I think this book is great, especially for people, for everyone getting into it, researchers in general, whether you've been doing this for a while or especially if you're just getting into this and you're fresh at this, because it gives the reader a comprehensive look at each of these subjects, and there's enough information that it's kind of overloading, but it's not overloading. You know what I mean? And it's going to encourage the listener, at least I feel, anyone that reads this book will be encouraged to do more reading and more research on the subject of whatever chapter it is, whatever you happen to be talking about. And you didn't just cover one thing. You covered the Kennedy assassination. You talked about Ted Kennedy. You talk about John Jr. There's RFK and other stuff too, but you touch on so many different subjects that you give, look, here's the information, here's what was going on, and it's not like you have, when it comes to RFK or Jack, it's not like you put 2 or 3 pages of information and then moved on to the next thing. You actually give a plethora of info, and I would say to the listener, if you buy his book, if you buy Donald's book and you read it, challenge yourself to, once you read the book, be intrigued to go do more research into each of those subjects if you don't already know a lot about them. Many of you are avid researchers and know a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people that have been in the research community for a very long time that listen to this broadcast. Even you guys and gals will really get a lot of info out of this book. I know I did. I got a ton of I got a ton of information out of this book. There were again, I had always felt that Teddy was set up, and I had heard rumors and seen a few things here and there, but I never actually got a chance to go down that angle. Even though I'm a Kennedy researcher, right? I never got a chance because of other stuff I was focused on. I never focused on Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick as much as I actually had wanted to. It was one of those things I'd always wanted to investigate. Well, reading your book, Donald, I was able to focus on that. So we're gonna get into Teddy in the next segment. We got about 7.5 minutes before we got to go to break, so we can get him in the next segment, a few other things. But I want to go back to the JFK assassination. I got to ask you, and I always break a situation down into two things, the event and then the aftermath. But if you had to look at the whole situation as a whole and step back even a little bit further, and you were looking at it, what is one red flag for you? What was the major thing that sticks out in your mind as, just screaming, no, the official story is a lie?
Well, it's changed over the years. At one point when I was young, it was the single bullet theory, or watching this Zapruder film and Kennedy's head going violently backwards and to the left and violating the laws of physics, since they claim Oswald was shooting from behind. But in the years since, I think the overriding thing for people to remember when they talk about the Kennedy assassination is that we had a president of the United States assassinated in broad daylight, and the crime was never investigated. It was never investigated from the very beginning. The leads, they had some really nice early leads. In fact, they had at least 5 or 6 people, for instance, all of them unconnected to each other, who all were, some of these witnesses were mistaken in the same identical manner, but they all reported seeing someone who looked very much like Oswald running down the slope from the Texas School Book Depository building in the immediate aftermath of the assassination and entering a Rambler station wagon. So here you had, that was a lead crying out to be investigated by the authorities. They just ignored it. And in fact, we didn't even know there were that many people corroborating it for a long time. For decades later, a couple of these affidavits were finally produced. So that was one thing where they were not trying to investigate. That was very obvious by, especially after Oswald was shot to death in front of over 70 Dallas police officers. And even as a 7-year-old in 1963, as I was, I remember at that time realizing, wow, Jack Ruby shot Oswald to shut him up, to keep him from talking. So my 7-year-old mind apparently was more analytical than the average mainstream journalist mind back then, because none of them asked that question. And then, sure enough, before Oswald's body was cold in the grave, you had Nicholas Katzenbach, who was the assistant attorney general, and was really the acting attorney general because Bobby Kennedy was devastated and wasn't able to do his job. He wrote a memo to Bill Moyers, who was a LBJ aide and future PBS television star, still active today, where he said, the public must be satisfied Oswald was the assassin, that he had no Confederates that are still at large, all speculation about his motivation should be cut off, and these are actual quotes from the memorandum. Every citizen has to consider what kind of high-ranking official in the Justice Department, as Katzenbach was, would possibly write a memorandum like that when there had been no investigation of really Jack Ruby's background, why he shot Oswald, and really no investigation of the assassination itself yet at all. All they knew is Oswald's kind of part of his murky background of defecting to Russia and so forth. That memorandum is a red flag to me because it shows that right from the very beginning, they're telling you, the government was telling you, we have to convince the public Oswald was the assassin. It should have said, we have to, with the assassination of the alleged assassin, no stone can be unturned. We must, find out exactly what motivated this guy to do it, and what conspirators he might have had. Clearly, there must have been some kind of connection between Ruby and Oswald, because why else would he shoot him? But it was nothing like that. And the press never. It left a bad taste in the public's mouth, especially because it was the first live murder on television, because it happened live on television. And that's why all polls have always shown that no matter how dumbed down the public is about many subjects, they've never bought that Oswald was the assassin. The majority have always said that it was a conspiracy. So they have not been successful selling that particular story. Even in 1963, they weren't. But to say there was one piece of evidence, obviously, if you have to go with something, if that's a little too esoteric for people, you obviously would go with the single bullet theory, which I'm sure most people are familiar with that. But I went to the National Archives in 1975 as a youngster, and I held that bullet in my hand, held the alleged rifle in my hand, saw the JFK's clothing. And, I'm not a shooter. I don't know much about guns, but I do know that a bullet that supposedly caused 7 wounds in 2 individuals, even, negating this magical flight where it had to make turns in midair and so forth and had a trajectory that was going up when it was being shot from 6 floors above, even discounting all that, there's no bullet, as Cyril Weck, a famous pathologist, has said, just show me one bullet in the history of the world that did what this bullet is alleged to do and looks like this. It's impossible. The same test, the ammunition that the Warren Commission, in their own exhibits, they showed that the same kind of ammunition fired into the wrist of a cadaver, into a goat carcass, were distorted beyond belief. And that's just one of the injuries that this bullet supposedly caused, because it supposedly shattered the human wrist, one of the thickest bones in the body of Governor Connolly. And it came out looking almost pristine. It came out looking, in fact, identical to the same bullet they fired in cotton wadding. So anybody that looks at that, their whole entire theory is based on that bullet, not to mention the bullet holes that don't line up. The holes in Kennedy's shirt and coat both are about 5.5 to 6 inches down on his back, which is where they match up with the original autopsy face sheet, and on the death certificate by Admiral Berkeley, But the government says all that's wrong because it actually ended at the back of his neck about 4 or 5 inches above that, because that's the only way they could even feasibly make the single bullet theory work. So these are the kind of things that once somebody, as I've said, somebody spends a week studying this evidence, it's impossible not to understand that the official story is a fairy tale. And anybody that has studied this in any depth at all and who maintains Oswald acted alone has some kind of an agenda. At this point, I can form another conclusion because I know the information too well, and I've tried to be open-minded, but I don't think there's an honest way for anybody to look at this evidence and possibly believe the government's version of it.
Agreed. 1,000%. There is you cannot look at this logically and come to the conclusion that Oswald was a lone assassin or any of that. You just will not come to that conclusion, period. End of story. When you actually start to look at the evidence, not just listen to what you were told by ABC or NBC or CBS or the FBI or the CIA. You notice the news agencies all have 3-letter acronyms as well as the government agencies that are full of it. I'm just saying, just an observation there, that the people that put out the propaganda that work hand in hand with the government agencies that put out the propaganda, they all have 3-letter names. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, I'm going to pause this because I know the break is sneaking up on us. Ladies and gentlemen, do not go anywhere. Donald and I will be right back in a few short minutes. Stay tuned. Go get his book, Hidden History. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So we're going to get right into it, as always, because there is so little time and so much information. And I'm not kidding you. You really need to go buy Donald's book. I don't come on air and talk about people's books at all. In the 5 years I've been doing radio, I will not have a guest on, nor will I promote their book if I think it's crap. I've never lied to you, never gotten paid to sell you someone's stuff that I wouldn't read myself, and or given somebody kudos that I really didn't like or didn't agree with just because I wanted them to sell a book. I don't do that. So I say with wholehearted sincerity that Hidden History, Donald Jeffries' book, this piece of work here, it's great. Again, I words, the words I've chosen probably don't they don't do it justice, and I say that because this book will really help a lot of people that don't know a lot about this stuff learn, and it'll intrigue them to dig deeper. That's the whole point of doing something like this. The whole point of writing a book is actually hoping that somebody's mind gets opened up and that they get intrigued. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You want them to drink from that fountain of knowledge and information. And that's what Donald's book will do. It's really, I honestly believe, if you know someone that's just waking up and getting into this is a really good start for them. Go pick up a copy of the book, give it to them. I'm pretty sure, I would say in my best guess of doing this for such a long time, this will help wake up the people that are on the fence or maybe close to it in your family. If they're a reader and they like history, buy them a copy of the book. It's even if they read it and they don't believe it, you read it yourself. At least you've given them that info, you've exposed them, you've planted that seed. You'd be surprised how far that goes, trust me. Anyway, Donald, welcome back. I want to get into Ted Kennedy, and we're gonna be kind of going all over the place. We're going to be talking about Clinton's, Kennedy, but I want to talk about Teddy Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. Now, the official version of events is, he was drunk, got in a car accident, drove into the water, and Mary Jo Kopechne was in the car. He was able to get out of the car. She wasn't, and she drowned. And that ruined Teddy politically, pretty much. There was never going to be a run for the presidency via Ted Kennedy. His two brothers were killed, and he was told not to run. And if he had any aspirations like Bobby did to defy the people that pull the levers of power behind the curtain, the great Oz, right? Bobby defied them. They told him not to run, and they killed him. Well, Teddy, they didn't assassinate physically. They assassinated him politically, although he did also survive a plane crash. So, and it's kind of amazing how many people die in single-engine plane crashes or little Cessnas and stuff. Like, if you just a note to self, if you're a politician or a whistleblower and you're pissing off the powers that shouldn't be, don't get in any small aircraft. Just a thought. Just saying. Anyway, so, Donald, Teddy Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. Go ahead. I'm going to give you the floor. You can pick it up wherever you want with it and blow the listeners' minds. Explain to them the hidden history of the Chappaquiddick incident.
Right after Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated, at the 1968 convention, a few people remember there was actually a brewing movement to try to draft Teddy Kennedy. That's how, and the sentiment was such he probably would have won if he had been drafted, but he opted not to, and I don't think it would happen anyhow. But by the time, when Chappaquiddick happened, and it happened at a very curious moment. It was basically the exact same time man first supposedly landed on the moon in July 1969. So a lot of the attention was distracted away from Chappaquiddick because of that event. And as you mentioned, I believe Chappaquiddick was the political assassination of Ted Kennedy. I think if it had not happened, there is zero doubt that Ted Kennedy would have been the 1972 Democratic presidential nominee. Certainly Nixon was worried about him even after Chappaquiddick. And I think he would have beaten Nixon, again, because Ted Kennedy, the only thing that kept him from the White House was Chappaquiddick. So it's important to analyze that. And most people haven't analyzed it because you basically have two theories there, and that's where you get the Kennedy haters on the right and the typical liberal Democratic politicians who just want to sweep these things under the rug. So basically the liberals just kind of accepted what Teddy's ridiculous story, impossible story of what he said he did, and, diving repeatedly with a bad back and getting out of that car himself with a bad back while the young athletic girl couldn't get out, swimming across the channel against the tide. I mean, just absurd stuff, and then they find her the next morning. His story made no sense, and it was calculated to make no sense in my view. But what has not been reported very much is the fact that, to me, what I'm impressed with is the fact that Ted Kennedy was seen by witnesses the following morning after the accident, appearing calm, relaxed, absolutely normal, engaging in friendly banter with people on their yacht. And then his cousin, Joe Gargan, and another witness came up to him and basically took him aside and told him something in low tones. And witnesses reported Kennedy turned as white as a sheet, ran off, and that was it. So in my view, I think what happened is that Ted Kennedy was not in the car that night. I think the evidence shows he wasn't there. I believe he was probably knocked out. There's some evidence that he had a big a wound or bump on his head. I believe he was knocked out, and he was probably wasn't told until the following day, where maybe he received a message that said, hey, there's a dead girl in your car at the bottom of Pucha Pond, and you make up the story. Ted was not the most intelligent of the Kennedy brothers. He was the least impressive, admittedly, of all four brothers. I mean, people forget Joe Kennedy Jr. was probably the most impressive. And I'd like to try to find out more information about that accident, as a matter of fact, because, he was the first, and I know Joe Kennedy Sr., supposedly told Harry Truman, that FDR had killed him. So he had a bright future in politics, and he was supposed to be the first Catholic president. That's what his father had great hopes for. It wasn't supposed to be John, who kind of belatedly came in to try to take his place. But Teddy, out of all four of them, he had not made it through college unscathed. He was caught cheating. He was probably the biggest womanizer of them all. He was a fun-loving guy. He wasn't, like I said, probably wasn't intellectual like the rest of them. But he was an old-line Irish type of politician who got along well with people. Clearly was likable, and I have no doubt they would have been elected. And I think the important thing about all these Kennedy cases, going to John F. Kennedy Jr., is that blood is thicker than water. Shakespeare wrote about this stuff. Back, and it's real. That despite what they say publicly, they understand what's been going on behind the scenes, and I suspect the Kennedys know better than anyone else that they've been murdered by the powers that be for a long time. And I believe that's, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s case. I know, from talking to people, that he had a quest to find out who killed his father. He wanted to avenge his death. And in Teddy's case, I believe there was something in that. I think that they knew he was going to run in 1972, but after the incident at Chappaquiddick, clearly, he would always opt out. 72, 76, he could have easily gotten the nomination was wide open. There was no incumbent president on the Democratic side. Jimmy Carter ended up getting it, but instead he curiously, and we still don't really understand the 1980 campaign, where he waited to really an odd moment when his moment in the sun had passed. He was older. He was going against an incumbent president, Jimmy Carter. But it was notable to watch how the mainstream media, which had covered up any mention of Chappaquiddick, and that had only been on the far right with the book Teddy Bear, and things like that that basically accused Kennedy of being a murderer. Said, Mary Jo Kopechne was pregnant, and that, he killed her, left her to, or at least left her in a drunken stupor to die, and it made him out to be this beast that they obviously believed he was. And I didn't believe that. I believe he was basically a good guy, and I don't think he was capable of murdering somebody, but I also don't believe his ridiculous story. So that's why, the take I have on it is in the book, where I think it was a political assassination. And again, the media was so funny when he finally ran in 1980. As soon as he did his first interview, Roger Mudd just ambushed him and whacked him, and they left all the ers and uhs in and had him looking like a stuttering fool. And before that interview, before they ambushed him with Chappaquiddick, which he hadn't heard anything about from the mainstream media for basically 11 years, before that he had been far ahead of Jimmy Carter in the polls, and probably would have beaten Reagan in the 1980 election. But after that, then he started sinking, and Jimmy Carter wasn't one of his finer moments. He kept saying that he wasn't going to discuss Chappaquiddick, but he kept bringing Chappaquiddick up. So clearly, I think that but, most people don't agree with me because they don't want to go to those extremes. And that's really, if there's a theme in the book, is that, as you mentioned, all these things. It's a timeline from 1963, the assassination, till now. And I just basically call it a non-stop and uninterrupted timeline of official corruption. And I think all these events are tied together. They don't have the same perpetrators behind them, but it's a way of our powers that be do business. This is the way they operate. It's standard operating procedure. So something like John F. Kennedy was a thorn in their side. So anybody that could possibly expose that huge issue, that story brings them down if the real facts emerge about that and the public accepts it. So that's why Robert F. Kennedy. I've one of my talking points is always that Robert F. Kennedy would have never been assassinated if John F. Kennedy hadn't been. And I firmly believe that. There's obviously a connection there. Most people can see that, but they don't go much beyond that. Maybe see Martin Luther King too, but they don't go into the Teddy Kennedy area, because then you're getting into shadowy figures in the background who knocked him out and left him there, and say, hey, make up a story, who were willing to kill a young girl. But I think we found out in the years since then that the people that rule us, really nothing is beyond them. They're certainly not, they're certainly capable of doing things like that and much more, as we've found out in so many incidents since then.
They could have easily drugged him, right? Given him some sort of drug or whatever, and when he got whatever it was, he wakes up and he's maybe on the side of the road or whatever. He comes to, and there's someone standing there, and they say, you've got, in basking in headlights at like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the guy's wearing like a, all black and a watch cover, which is, one of those wool hats, right? And he says to him, hey, there's pictures of you, and there's he has pictures of Ted passed out next to this dead girl, and he says, look, here's this dead girl, here's accident, you make up a story, whatever, blah 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 blah. However people want to think it happened. The minutia of did they grab him and knock him out? People could argue that, and the semantics of that till the cows come home. The point is it possible that somebody did something nefarious like that to politically assassinate Ted Kennedy? They couldn't. They probably realized it. There was probably really. If he had gotten too far, maybe they would have assassinated him. But at that point, there wasn't a physical reason to take him out. And perhaps maybe they had tried with the plane crash and they didn't succeed, so they figured it would look a little too obvious if they did it again. So this time, they kill him politically, making it an impossibility that he'll ever get a presidency, and there'll never be a Kennedy dynasty ever again. Camelot will not rise from the ashes. They feared that, and I know to a degree. And it's not that I think Jack was perfect or anything like that, but he actually thought he was the president, and he thought he was like, this whole Vietnam War thing, not a good idea. And they didn't want that. Bobby was going to investigate his brother's death, and the same thing. He was speaking against the Vietnam War. Oh, ironically, he gets killed. Oh, ironically, Martin Luther King Jr. speaking against the Vietnam War and the military-industrial complex. And they didn't kill him when he was pushing for civil liberties for black people and for civil rights. No, They killed him when he was talking about everybody in the world being subjugated pretty much by the powers that shouldn't be. And he was pretty much talking about what we talk about today, and they killed him. And by the way, just so people know, there was actually a civil trial where it was found that the United States federal government killed Martin Luther King Jr. Did you know that his family went to James Earl Ray's funeral, the alleged assassin? Why would his family go to James Earl Ray's funeral and say, we know you didn't do it? We know he didn't do it. He's innocent. Explain that one to me if the official version of events is accurate.
I wrote an article you can still find out online about that trial of Lloyd Jowers, and that didn't. And it's interesting. I'm working on hidden history too. I mean that'll be all out. Who knows when. I have other books in front of it, but that's pre-1963 conspiracies. And Martin Luther King, in many ways, as far as how he's treated by the mainstream media and the establishment, is like Abraham Lincoln, where you can't really say anything bad about his character. He's considered a saintly figure, without flaws. But just like Lincoln, both of their deaths, were covered up, and neither can be looked into. And here we have a guy who's, has a national holiday. He's considered an icon by the modern establishment, and yet you had a trial that, concluded that the government had killed him, and that James Earl Ray hadn't. The guy was in prison for it, and it was crickets. The mainstream media had no interest in it, and that's really the other underlying theme of my book is the performance of the media, and I can't stress it enough how bad. And I think probably certainly and probably almost all your listeners would agree with me, but we see this over and over again, and it's almost pathetic now to I can't stand watching television news for more than a few seconds, but if you have to, it is really pathetic to watch these dinosaurs try to manipulate people as they did in the past, and it works on fewer and fewer people because it's so transparent. The agenda is so clear, and in my view, one of the most attractive elements about Donald Trump is the fact that he is treated so disrespectfully and attacked so relentlessly in the media. So you have to think there must be something good about him because he's got all the right enemies, and really we shouldn't ideally. You shouldn't be able to, if someone's reporting the news, you shouldn't be able to know what their views are. But there just aren't any, everybody understands that. And watching it, and when you watch these big stories, and if you've investigated them like I have, in this book, if I know about the Martin Luther King case or John F. Kennedy's assassination or anything, I just cringe when I watch some of these specials that come on, and it's unbelievable how they just lie unashamedly. Or I'll look at C-SPAN. C-SPAN was pretty good until 15, 20 years ago. But there was a change there. And they used to have really some extreme stuff on there in the weekends where they would cover, hearings of real extremist groups. And I used to, watch some of that stuff. They don't do that now at all. But when they covered all the political assassinations last year on the 150th anniversary of the Lincoln assassination, and just to watch the guy that talked about the JFK assassination, I wanted to just jump to the television screen because, I knew so much more about the subject than this distinguished college professor did, and he just spouted off just one lie after another before this audience that just didn't know the subject matter and is eating it all in. And then I listened to the questions, and there wasn't a single testing question. It was like watching a presidential press conference. And that's the awful part. That's why we depend so much on the internet, because we can't beat that. As long as people are still getting absorbed in these things and watching television, there's nobody there to counter those people and correct them and present the other side. And so it's thank goodness for the internet. And let's all hope that they can't get their hands on it.
Well, they're trying to corrupt it. That's why they want to shut that medium down. That's why you hear them constantly talking about internet censorship. We have to protect the children. No. They always use the children. Let's just be clear, okay?
Yes.
If they wanted to protect children, they wouldn't have committed the atrocities of Waco.
Exactly.
Drops mic, walks off stage. End of story. Period. End of story. They killed innocent women and children with shaped charges inside of a room they called the vault. They put shaped charges on it, and when you detonate a shaped charge into a metal box, the pressure wave is going to bounce around the inside of that box. So what do you think it does to any living human organism made of soft tissue inside that box when you have an overpressurization bouncing around in there? What do you think happens to the people inside that box?
Yeah, just another shameful moment. And again, that's one of those. And Waco, certainly Waco, and then Oklahoma City. That was probably the last time until very similar to the times we have now, because both Trump and Bernie Sanders represent the populism. And that's what, if I'm anything, I'm a populist. And my hero is Huey Long. That's my all-time political hero. And I'm a populist. I believe in power to the people. I believe in the little guy, and I hate big government, big business. I hate concentrated power. But in the early 90s, the reason Ross Perot, another renegade billionaire, the reason his campaign caught so much fire is because there was discontent then. And then after, he got 19% of the vote. But then after that, we saw Waco, and we saw the feds get away with, as you mentioned, they did stop them from being allegedly abused by killing them. But the children didn't have to worry about that anymore, although there was no evidence for that. And then we saw Oklahoma City, where I certainly, have what I hope is the real story behind that in the book. I certainly don't believe that Timothy McVeigh was the lone nut magical cow fertilizer bomber of that. But even if you accepted the story that McVeigh and Nichols had acted, their motivation was genuine, would have been genuine, because they were upset about what had happened in Waco, and so were so many other people. And of course, in the wake of that, what happened was Bill Clinton clamped down and demonized talk radio, which was big then, and the burgeoning militia movement. And basically, the third-party movement died. Ross Perot only got 8% of the vote in 1996 when he ran again. And it really wasn't until now, when people are real dissatisfied again with the internet, where you see the same disconnect. And it will be interesting to see what happens, because obviously the powers that be want to crush that too. And we have, a very flawed but another renegade billionaire with Donald Trump. And now that Bernie Sanders has thrown in the towel and disappointed his supporters by backing the candidate, the queen of corruption, who stole the nomination from him with obvious voting fraud, people have nowhere else to turn. So we'll see what happens if they have another Oklahoma City type of thing that tries to crush this independent movement.
Yeah, I was not surprised when Bernie dropped that little bomb. And anybody that's been paying attention to this whole mess has been saying that for months now. People have been saying, including myself and other hosts here on the network and other researchers I know, have been saying, look, don't, try not to get too disappointed, but Bernie's not going to get the nomination. Hillary is, and then he's going to turn around and he's going to endorse her. And people are like, no, Senator Sanders is a man of his, he's a man of great integrity. He'll stand up to the powers that shouldn't be. Oh, wait, he did what? Did he just endorse Hillary Clinton? I mean, I was reading the tweets yesterday, and people were like wholeheartedly upset. Although that does do something good. That although people are going to be upset by it and they're going to be pissed off and they might be disillusioned to a degree, this is going to help people unplug. This is one of those events that, some people won't. Some people might just go vote for Hillary. But the ones that are pissed off and truly upset about being stabbed in the back by Bernie Sanders some of them will see the light, so to speak. They'll unplug from the matrix. They'll understand a little bit further. Hey, wait a minute. Maybe those conspiracy people that I'm always making fun of and throwing pejoratives at and using logical fallacy after logical fallacy to attack them, maybe they're actually right. Maybe I should pay attention. And if even one person opens their mind up and looks further into the events that are going on around them in this current, not even in the past, but just current time right now, then it's worth it. And something has positive, something has been done, and a positive outcome has come out of it. So,
well, I hope so. As you know, in history, I have a pretty long section on vote scam. The Collier brothers. I'm friends with the Colliers. They're both dead now, but Victoria Collier, one of their daughters, is still carrying on their work. Although she's pretty much a conventional liberal, but she's still going after the vote fraud. And I hope people have gotten an eyeful in both, because we saw in both parties, we saw the sausage being made. I mean, you saw them overtly trying to steal from Donald Trump, and ultimately appear to have been unsuccessful. There's still rumblings. They may still try to change rules at the convention. We had a Republican Party official saying it's not the delegate, it's not the people that votes that counts, it's the delegates. And the Democrats, they're still voting, counting votes in California, I think. So and they just kept, Bernie Sanders would win a state, and no matter, Hillary would still get more delegates. And people, because he had so many enthusiastic supporters, I think people are, a lot of people were awakened to this, but we'll see how awake they were. Because like you mentioned, if Hillary Clinton, still wins somehow, now whether it's Donald Trump winning, or even if Jill Stein would suddenly get a lot of Bernie supporters and get a huge amount, that would be a good sign. But I just suspect that either the powers that be won't allow that to happen, and because the vote fraud wasn't addressed, we had a real chance to after the 2000 election. And I wasn't surprised by it, because the hanging chads and all that stuff they talked about was familiar to me from the Collier brothers' work from back in the 1980s. And in fact, one of the great conspiratorial lines that I have in the book there, where the Colliers reported that when they went to visit the guy who was writing it was a computer, and they were computer programs, so they knew how this stuff worked. And they went to talk to a guy, I believe it was at the University of Miami, who was overseeing, in charge of programming the software that predicted, the vote totals. He basically told them, before they even asked the question, he said, "You'll never prove a thing." It's like I have a bad science fiction movie. And if you read their book, you'll see what they were up against. I mean, they filmed, videotaped League of Women Voters, marking the same ballot multiple times. And we've seen it over and over again. Ron Paul, certainly in 2012, it was just massive voting fraud there. I went to Ron Paul rallies, and I saw what kind of support he had. And they would claim, Rick Santorum, who couldn't get 5 people at his rallies, were beating him. And we saw the same thing in this campaign, where Bernie Sanders would get 30,000 people, and Hillary would fill up a small room. Donald Trump would have 30,000 supporters. Ted Cruz.
I'm going to cut us off because the break is going to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Donald and I will be right back in 3 short minutes. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. PopeyeRadio.com, and of course my massive YouTube archive, DTRH Radio Archives, DTRH Radio Archives, Delta Tango Romeo Hotel Radio Archives over on YouTube. And Popeye Radio is just a basic, easy directory listing page. Basically, it works with every type of device that you can click on, whether it's with your fingers, a stylus, a mouse, whatever. And if you can get on the internet and you can click links with it, you can get onto PopeyeRadio.com and download all of my shows that I've rendered in MP3 format and cut out the commercials and stuff. And I put it all up there on that server for free. Go download them, and I encourage people to download them from there. Don't just stream it from the server. The reason I say that is you never know when they could try to take something down, or at least slow down your access or impede it for a period of time to the internet, or even just to the website itself or my archives. And I'm not going to be around forever anyway. We're all just humans. Our time here on this planet, if you think of things, well, time's really not linear. That's a whole nother conversation. But you get my point. We're here for a brief instant, I'd like to say. So, with that in mind, go over to PopeyeRadio.com. Rip all of the archives. Save them, put them on hard drives, do whatever you're going to do. Listen to them, pass them around. Put them, if you want to edit out like small sections, little rants, and put them up on YouTube. You have my permission to do that. Getting back into hour number 2. Tonight's guest, Donald Jeffries. His book, Hidden History. Ladies and gentlemen, go get a copy of this. I know I sound like an infomercial here for Donald's book, but you need to get it. Hidden History, an expose of modern crimes, conspiracies, and cover-ups in American politics. So, Donald, we're back with hour 2 here, and we were talking about politics. We were talking Trump. We were talking Clinton. We were talking all the chicanery going on with the 2016 selection, right? Because it's really not an election. So, with that in mind, I want to shift gears from the Kennedys to the Clintons, because that plays a big part in your book as well, the scumbaggery and the crimes of the Clinton family. So I'm going to give you the floor, and you pick up wherever you want for the listeners with the scumbaggery of Hillary and Bill, because I mean it's such a vast area of scumbaggery. You could pretty much put on a blindfold, spin 360s, and chuck a rock in any direction and hit some sort of level of corruption that they've been involved in. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Well, Hillary, like Bill, I mean, it's like they're walking corruptions. It's walking scandals. It's amazing, and that's why I've gotten into so many arguments on Facebook, because especially with the hatred of Trump out there, people are just they're willing to overlook so many things. I mean, the latest thing, obviously, are her emails. And, they used to call Reagan the Teflon president. You'd have to come up with a new term then for the Clintons, both of them. But, whether it's Vince Foster, whether it's, Jerry Parks, the guy who, predicted he was going to be killed, and then how many people die as they're driving down the highway and somebody just shoots them out of the car. That's the way he died, and that's the way people tend to, Kathleen Willey, said she was groped in the White House, and while that was happening, Linda Tripp was one of her corroborating witnesses. Saw her exit the White House. At the very moment she was actually asking for Bill Clinton's help. They were old friends. That moment, her husband Ed Willey, was lying in the woods dead with a gunshot wound. These are the way people die around the Clintons. I mean, their chef died unnaturally not that long ago, and the most recent one that could possibly be a member of the Clinton body count was this young DNC official that was just murdered in D.C. the other day. I don't know what his story was. I mean, some of the conspiracy theorists say he was some kind of whistleblower, but all I know is he was a DNC official. Hillary's the nominee of the party. So these kind of deaths seem to follow her wherever you go. And during my investigation, I had a long conversation with Linda Tripp. It was a very nice lady. I talked to her on the phone, and I just remember how demonized she was in the media. And this is what the Clintons especially are so adept at. They demonize their enemies, their perceived enemies. And she told me she was a lifelong Democrat. She didn't hate. She was a bureaucrat that had been in the White House for many years before the Clintons. But the Clintons succeed in transforming people like her, who was nothing but a relatively low-level bureaucrat who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And she told me we all knew about the Clinton body count and all the mysterious deaths. And her first impulse was to try to warn young Monica Lewinsky about this, that you don't want to become another, member of the Clinton body count. And if you remember, John Goodman at that time portrayed Linda Tripp on Saturday Night Live, and she tried to explain how it was her kids watch. Just imagine your kids watching something like that. Her looks were ridiculed all the time, and all she was a whistleblower. I've gotten arguments on, people still believe the most awful things about her, and that was kind of a sign of things to come. As we see now, whistleblowers are the ones that are demonized and punished. From her all the way down to, Bradley Manning or, Edward Snowden certainly now, instead of the wrongdoers they're trying to finger. But, in the Clintons' case, these are real people that were impacted by their actions. I've become good friends on Facebook with Linda Ives, who was the mother of Kevin Ives, one of the boys, Donna Henry and Kevin Ives, the teenage boys who died on the train tracks in Mena, Arkansas, who were just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were murdered. And they covered it up and claimed they killed themselves. And then Governor Bill Clinton's corrupt medical examiner, Fahmy Malek, who just had a slew of cases like that where he would come up with ridiculous, decidedly unprofessional conclusions about how people had died who were inconvenient to Bill Clinton, just concluded that they killed themselves. And they had the boys exhumed, and they found evidence that they'd been beaten and so forth by another medical examiner, but it didn't matter. And people, and as she told me, they were just average people. They certainly didn't hate the Clintons. They were like most people don't care about politics. They weren't political. They didn't hate or like the Clintons. They didn't really care about them. But here, her life was, as she said, I've got the quotes from her in my book. The emails were, it's very heartfelt and very touching the way, she really touched me, because this is someone who's lost her child. Because of the massive corruption that continues to this day. And so I have, a definite spot in my heart, for people like that. And I, really irritates me so much to think that we're going to, not that these other presidents, both Bushes, not that they were really any better, or Obama, but the Clintons, the corruption was so in your face. I mean, I call it Conspiracy Central, the chapter on the Clintons in the book, and it really was. I mean, the body count was so obvious. Like I said, you have people like Jerry Parks, who's going around telling people that he's going to be assassinated, or Vince Foster. I mean, all you need to know about the Vince Foster case, the first thing, I believe Larry Nichols has tried to talk about this in one of his interviews, several of his interviews. All you need to know about that is there was a Secret Service memo, an official Secret Service memo, that described finding Vince Foster's body in his car. Now, that contradicts every part of the crime scene. It said he was found on the ground in Fort Marcy Park. So how do you explain something like that? That's not a mistake. You can't possibly make those kind of mistakes. But our politics are filled with those kind of so-called mistakes and what I call red flags. And as we go farther down the rabbit hole and we see in more recent incidents, I've come to believe almost that there's a purposeful sloppiness about these people, whether it goes back to the single bullet theory and the JFK assassination, where I've often wondered, why would you plant a bullet that looked like it had hit nothing? It's like they were advertising, this is, we did it, and I think they knew at that time, and they still know, whether it's Sandy Hook or any of the more recent events, that no matter how blatant they make things, the vast majority of the public is asleep. And certainly the Clintons were experts at that. Vince Foster case, they found the belated suicide note, and the only part missing was the signature. I mean, just that they couldn't find. It's unbelievable the level of corruption on the part of some of these leaders. But Hillary Clinton is especially adept at it, and she appears to be a pretty nasty individual too. So I think all of us, regardless of who gets elected president, and obviously Trump would probably be the only other one that would have a chance. I don't see a third-party candidate winning, not in this country. Even if they counted the votes, honestly, which they probably don't. But I think every American, whatever they do, if you can't bring yourself to vote for Trump, then vote for Jill Stein. Vote your conscience. And to vote for Hillary Clinton, it would just cap off a career of corruption, and to go through another period of this and the media covering up for her, as we saw. With the FBI and the Attorney General, they're just all in on it, and they won't hold her accountable as any other government employee would be held accountable. And so anybody that really cares about Democratic or Republican government, representative government, should really, the last person they should want to see in the White House is Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, when I say she's evil, I think some people think that's like a level of hyperbole. It's not. I'm not bloviating. I'm not trying to blow things out of proportion. That woman is literally evil. She was Bill's handler. Let's just be honest. When she was the president, when he was the president, right? She was his handler. Anybody with half a brain knows this. And now she would just be she wouldn't be behind the scenes anymore. She'd be the front man. She was still in charge back then. I mean, who's the one that broke into Vince Foster's office? Right, it wasn't Bill.
and as my friend Roger Stone has shown in his book, The Clintons' War on Women, which is another good book for people to read, Hillary was really not only an enabler, but she was the person who led the attacks on these victims. Kathleen Willey and others have talked about how their lives were ruined, they were threatened, and things. I think Kathleen Willey's dog was killed. I mean, just mafia corruption stuff. I mean, just in your face gangsterism. And these women talk about how Hillary was the one who was, really behind, was going after them and trying to destroy their reputations, which really makes it laughable for her to appear as, what kind of feminist has had a sham of a marriage for decades to this chronic womanizer, and who tries to, and people would talk about JFK or the Kennedys being womanizer. Even if you bought into all those stories, what distinguishes a Kennedy womanizing, alleged womanizing, from a Clinton womanizing is that if Kennedy was screwing around, he was dealing with movie stars like Marilyn Monroe, people that were his level. In Bill Clinton's case, he was harassing employees, the Paula Jones types, who were low-level, government workers, Monica Lewinsky, White House intern, who he had great power over. And I think that's just a whole different level that to me that is on a completely different level than somebody who's just cheating on his wife with a movie star. But to have the wife know about it as Hillary did, and to just continue to go after them, it makes a mockery of these feminists that would support her. And even more laughable is like when they asked Chelsea Clinton, they don't ask Chelsea Clinton, I'm sorry, when they ask Donald Trump's daughter, what do you think of, how do you think your father treats women? And, they try to claim Trump is, some decades old, discredited thing where he supposedly was accused of something with them. It's nothing compared to the people. Bill Clinton was accused so often, so frequently, and they even have, weird things like biting of the lips that several different women unconnected to each other talked about. So clearly there's something there, but the media just doesn't care because they obviously know that Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton is going to carry forth their agenda, and there is a clear agenda, and that's why, again, we get to the media where there's a very very small line between the media and the government, and a lot of times our media just seems like a state-run media that really is affiliated as the fifth branch of the government.
Okay, I mentioned House of Cards, that Netflix series. And I've said this before. I don't know if I've ever said this on air, but I've said this before in conversations off air with people. That show, two main characters, Francis Underwood and his wife, they remind me of those two are the Clintons. I mean, they're Democrats in the show. I'm convinced that largely in part those characters are based off the Clintons, because they will stop at nothing. They will stop at nothing to achieve their political goals. Now, think about the fact that the Clintons know. The show doesn't talk about all the darker, deeper connections that presidents and politicians have, because they're not the top of the food chain. Come on. Like LBJ was involved in Kennedy's killing, but he wasn't at the top of the food chain. No president is. They're just they're a mouthpiece. They're a face for people to get pissed off at, and oh, Bush, he was a dick. When Obama's out, people, oh, he's a dick, he was a horrible president. Clinton, he was a horrible president. Oh, Reagan. They'll be the front man for people to focus their negativity and energy and anger on. When the people that actually pull the levers of power, it's like the mafia dons. They're these little old men that wear 30-year-old sweaters and drive around in, an old beater car and live in a very modest house. They're the ones that you don't know their names. Even people above, like Brzezinski and Kissinger and all, they're not at the top of the food chain either. Soros. If you know their name, they're not at the top of the food chain. It's the people whose names you don't know that actually run things. And people are starting to understand that, I think, to a large degree. Well, maybe not that deep yet, but they're on their way to that by being exposed to the political chicanery. I've also seen the opposite side of that, where people are like, well, anything to stop Trump from getting in. And it's like, do you not realize that this whole thing is contrived? This whole thing. They break everything down. They break it down from a very complex situation into something very easy to control. A or B. Pick a side. That's how they do it. And that's what they've been doing for the past 2 years, pretty much since Ferguson, leading up to the election. Because the country was waking up.
Exactly. One of the all-time great conspiratorial quotes was James Forrestal, who was the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of Defense back in the Truman years, who was one of the mysterious deaths I talk a little bit about in Hidden History too, who supposedly jumped to his death from the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And ironically, he told Senator Joe McCarthy at the time, the famous alleged witch-hunting senator, before McCarthy later died mysteriously in Bethesda Naval Hospital too, and of course that's where JFK had his autopsy as well, just to put the trifecta on it there. But he told him, and this quote is well remembering, he said, if there wasn't a conspiracy, and he was mainly talking about the communists, he said once in a while they'd make a mistake in our favor. They'd do something right. So you're right, if there wasn't something at the top, something pulling these strings to make sure that things get run in a certain way, so one of these people would accidentally do something that benefited everyone. They would just, they do something right, and they just never do. And in my next book, Survival of the Richest, I talk about this over and over again, where it's the benefit. The last politician that really talked about giving the people something, transferring to the people, was Huey Long. All these other politicians, left or right, they love to talk about sacrifice, more austerity, give this up. The American people have never been reluctant to tighten their belts, and sacrifice some more. But of course, they never sacrifice. The people at the top never do. And so this, I think it's getting old, especially with the millennials coming along now who are struggling in this awful economy. To keep hearing, having to talk to people who are, in their 30s and even 40s and still having to live at home, or, because they can't afford to live outside of it because they can't get a job paying enough, to continue to talk. These people are not buying the sacrifice nonsense, because they've sacrificed their entire lives. And, we certainly never have gotten any kind of a peace dividend because we're never at peace, And that's one of the things, Trump isn't even giving us much in his rhetoric, is that it's all war all the time, and it's just tough talk constantly. And I would, I think if Vladimir Putin was on the ballot over here, he would probably be elected in a landslide, because he certainly sounds better than what we have. But you're right. But trying to identify the people that are at the top of the, whether you call them the Illuminati or whatever you want to call them, we may not even know their identities. You're right. I mean, maybe various Rothschilds or whatever in there, but the ones we have to go on are people like the Clintons, and any way you look at it, they're just full-blown gangster-type personalities. I mean, the corruption, they wear it on their sleeves. They don't try, like I said, in Hillary Clinton's case, she doesn't even really try to hide what kind of personality she is, whether she's laughing inappropriately or just, caught doing it. But it doesn't matter, because no matter what she does, the powers that be want her in there as the figurehead, and they just manipulate things to try to make her look good. And of course, the worst part about her is just as Barack Obama was placed in there so that any criticism of him, but it's basically criticism of what's going on. The president is the front man for that. He has to, bear the brunt of attack. So basically, how the country is going. They're basically talking about what's going on in America, the economy, and so forth. The criticism of any criticism, like when I've tried to point out how unemployment rates are completely fake, and Trump has actually talked about that because they only count the people that are presently getting unemployment benefits, then they invariably say you're racist because Obama's the president. If Hillary gets in there, it's going to be the same thing, except it's going to be sexist. And we already hear it all the time. We're already starting to hear rumblings that, well, you're threatened by a strong woman, and we can't have a woman in power. Isn't it time we had a female president? And she'll play that gender card for all it's worth, because she has nothing else really to go for. So I hate to see, when they have something like that, where they have a particular minority, whatever, that can't be criticized in power, because then it makes all criticism of the system hard, because then it's met with name calling and so forth, and it just makes a bad situation even worse. But you're right, we probably don't know the names of our actual masters.
And that race card thing, they started playing it as soon as Obama became president-elect, before he was even president. And it started off it started off slow, and within a few weeks, it was the most absurd things. Like, you couldn't make any argument, you couldn't criticize anything he did politically. If you did, you were doing so because he was the first black president, and you were just being racist. I mean, I had arguments with friends about this. So you could see right off the bat, like, the problems we have today with quote-unquote racial tension in this country. And I've said this before. I know that we've had racial tension in this country, but we were beyond where we are right now. Like, we were past this. This was no longer an issue. Okay, where we're at right now, the anger, the hatred towards one another, we were well beyond this. This was manipulated, and it all started with, oh, you're racist because you don't agree with this president and his policies. Now, that seed, that's like dropping multiple seeds. First of all, it allows them, like you said, that when they don't have any other defense, racism, they can use that as an excuse, right? But at the same time, it also helps sow the seeds of what you see today, what you see going on now. It allows them to divide people and divide the country further. So now, like you said, and I've been saying this for 2 years, I just found a show I did with Aaron Dykes and Melissa Melton 2 years ago about this, where we talked about Hillary 2016, and this was in 2014. And I posted it on Facebook earlier today. And in that show, we were saying, you watch, they're going to use, because she's a female, you don't want her to be, the president because you're sexist. And we called 2 years ago, we said that was going to be used as an excuse. And like you said, they're doing it. And they're already laying the groundwork. They've been doing it for like a year. I heard commentary I think it was like a year ago on MSNBC and CNN. That, if you're against Hillary running for president in the next year, then you're only doing that because you're afraid of a woman getting to be the president, and you're just totally sexist and da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, no, they're narrowing every argument, every debate. First of all, they're engaging in logical fallacies. So that's one. When you engage in a logical fallacy, you no longer have a valid argument. Done. Period. End of story. But they engage in it. They base their whole argument based off of a logical fallacy, usually appeal to emotion, and they'll call you names, and they use ad hominems and strawmans, and they'll call you names. They'll label you things. Oh, you're a such and such, or you're being such and such, racist, sexist, whatever ist or ism they want to throw at you. And they narrow an argument that should be a valid argument. When I say argument, I don't mean yelling and screaming, but valid debate back and forth about a subject. They narrow it down from a valid logical debate, and they remove that, and they turn it into, you're this, you're that, and I can't talk to you. And that's it. And if the person becomes so narrow-minded, they shut down the conversation, and they destroy it. They literally shut down the conversation, and that's what they've done now, and they narrow it down to the lowest common denominator, which is what's most controllable.
Yeah, they want to narrow the parameters of debate so much. Look at what's going on in, obviously, the Black Lives Matters and the police shootings. I mean, I've written extensively. I had a thing on my blog, Jolly Coppers on Parade, where I tried to go over. I mean, the police are out of control. It's going on for a long time. Now that we have videos showing it, documenting way too many of them act, and more importantly, how they're never seemingly reprimanded no matter what they do. But what happens is you take an issue like that, a real issue that needs to be talked about, and they should have congressional hearings on it, because they should be grilling the police chiefs who let these guys off.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Final segment. So I want to get right back into it because we don't have much time. Donald, really quick before we go back into the conversation about the current division and everything in this country, really quick, plug your book one more time.
Okay, it's Hidden History and Expose of Modern Crimes, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups in American Politics, and it's available everywhere, published by Skyhorse Publishing. If you can go to my blog at donaldjeffries.wordpress.com, and it has my writing on a variety of issues, and I try to keep current on it. I also keep people updated with my whatever coming books are coming out.
Awesome. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, go get a copy of his book. And again, this is all very tied into what his book is about. Again, the scumbaggery of the Clinton family, Obama. He's got a body count. We're going to get into that in a few minutes, but I want to stay talking about this for a second, this division, because this is all part of this much larger grand agenda. They need to keep this country divided on every level possible, whether it's sexual orientation, political ideology, religious affiliation. It doesn't matter. They need to keep us all divided. They don't want anybody paying attention and realizing that no matter what religion you believe in, what nationality you are, no matter what cultural background you come from, no matter what color your skin is, no matter if you have tattoos on your skin or not. It doesn't matter if you live on the West Coast or the East Coast, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. None of that matters. It doesn't matter if you have brown eyes, blue eyes, a beard, or no beard, long hair, short hair. Doesn't matter. None of that matters. You know what matters is that we're all human, and that we have more in common than we do that divides us. And the stuff that really divides us right now, pardon my French if people can't handle it, but it's bullshit. It's all lower level thinking, base level thinking, and they keep humanity in this base level thinking. That's what the checkerboard floor in the Masonic temples is. That's humanity. We're at base. That's what 666 actually means. Not the number of a man. It's the number of man. Us. Base level thinking. Why do you think they narrow everything down into the easiest of arguments? Appeal to emotion. There is no logic. They don't want you having higher thought. So they bring you back down into base level thinking with appeals to emotion. Arguments based off of lies. Things to tweak your emotions and make you not actually react, not think. You're socially programmed. And that's what you see going on today. That's where this anger, and I'm not saying that there isn't legitimate anger with, and there isn't a problem in certain areas where you do have legitimately racist individuals on every side of the fence. Let's be clear, racist doesn't mean that you're white and you want to kill everybody else that's not white. Racism is the belief that your race is better than any other race on the planet. Therefore, you could be whatever race that there is. If you think that you're better than everybody else, and you disparage people because they're not from your culture or quote unquote race, well then, yeah, you're being quote unquote the definition of racist. That's what it means. And no, white people didn't invent that. America didn't invent that. Racism and slavery go back a very, very, very long time. To the beginning of human history. As long as it's been recorded, there's been slavery and classism, or whatever you want to call it, racism. It's all the same crap. The real problem is that there's a police state and that police brutality is out of control. See, that's the real conversation, and the narrative was switched after Ferguson. See, and I said this repeatedly, numerous times on numerous shows. Before Ferguson, it was, hey, how come the cops have MRAPs? How come they're dressed like G.I. Joe? Now, after Ferguson, it's morphed into, well, I understand why the cops have MRAPs. They need to be protected. And now because cops were killed, the 2 NYPD officers last year that were ambushed, the other 2 that were sitting in, I think it was a McDonald's or wherever they were eating, and they got killed. And then now the Dallas cops. Now I hear people saying, well, cops need that weapons. They need those MRAPs. They need all that type of stuff. The mayor of Dallas was out there in a speech with the chief of police a couple of days ago, like right after the event happened, like the next morning, and he was like, well, this is, when people question why cops have the equipment they have, this is the reason why, and I'm going to push to double down and get them even more equipment. And to the Dallas chief of police, to his credit, he actually went back and made like a backup comment, and like he wanted to touch on what the mayor had just said. And he said, wait, hold on, let me touch on what the mayor just said. And he said, we will not become a militarized police force in response to this, basically. And I was like, wow, I'll give the guy credit, like clap, kudos. Like, yeah, now let's see if they actually follow through with that. But I was actually surprised that he went back and made the decision to actually, because you could see it was almost like he was defying what the mayor said. Because the mayor was like, yeah, we're going for it. I'm going to double down on getting cops MRAPs and tanks and, fully automatic weapons and rifles and whatever else they need. And, let's get them Claymore mines while we're at it. And why don't we just get them rocket launchers, too? No, I'm being sarcastic there. But you get my point, ladies and gentlemen. So you have this really interesting narrative change that I've seen in the past 2 years where everybody, didn't matter if you were black, white, red, purple with pink polka dots. Everybody was realizing that we were all in the same pot that was boiling very slowly, the frogs in the pot. Okay? We were all in it together. And that the narrative was, hey, how come police are like shooting little old lady? Remember, Donald? They shot a woman in a church parking lot over not signing a ticket because she tried driving away. It was an old white lady, and they killed her.
How about the black woman that was shot in the nation's capital in a car with her little child strapped in the safety seat back of her, shot to death by the Capitol Police, and the Congress of the United States gave her a standing ovation. Gottman gave the Capitol Police a standing ovation a couple days later. And again, no outcry from Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson, and that's what we see. Like you talked about, they changed the issue from police brutality and out of control police all over the country, and the fact they throw people from wheelchairs, they're tasering naked 11-year-old autistic girls, and these things actually happen. They're feeling threatened by tiny dogs and threatened by people, the little skateboarder kids, raging out on all these people, going over the top, shooting dogs, shooting people, and with their new shoot to kill policy, they don't even try to injure. They just shoot for the body, and they're as long as they say they feel threatened, that's all that matters. And even though they claim it's just a few bad eggs, apparently there aren't any good eggs running these police departments, because they get off every single time. And of course, the worst example was white homeless man Kelly Thomas, who was beaten to death. The entire incident caught, videotaped. Never has a murder been more thoroughly documented than that, as he pleads for help the entire time. Helpless, beaten viciously to death by a bunch of cops, and a brain-dead jury found him not guilty. There were no riots. Nobody cared. The only time they make a deal out of it is like what's happening now, where they've turned it into completely a predictable racial issue. And they typically don't even take there are plenty of examples, if you want to go online, of cops doing awful things to black people. There's holding a bunch of young black boys on the ground at gunpoint who were reported to be building a treehouse. The homeless black guy in a parking lot that they shot like 40-some times when he pulled a little penknife on him because they sicked their police dog on him. Again, no Al Sharpton, no Jesse Jackson. And I feel the reason that they don't bring attention to those cases, even involving blacks and white cops, is because very few people could side with the cops in those cases. But in Ferguson, some of these other cases that do, Trayvon Martin, even going back to that, it's kind of unclear as to who was actually at fault. So it breaks down upon traditional racial lines. White people tend to follow the cops, and especially with the more very vociferous and vocal Black Lives Matters protesters, they're kind of rubbing that in people's faces. A lot of white people are turned off by that, especially when you say Black Lives Matters and you counter with All Lives Matters and you say that's racist. No, they don't. I mean, how can you say all lives don't matter? So, but they turn it into something racial, and that's what they want. I was chatting with Cynthia McKinney on Facebook today, who was one of the people that endorsed my book, and she would love to bring people together, and she's one of the few people out there that are black leaders that are working for that. But unfortunately, you have people like former crack dealer turned FBI informant Al Sharpton, and lifelong shakedown artist Jesse Jackson. If you see these people show up talking about it, it's like I say about any of the other psyops that come along. If the mainstream media is reporting it, I don't believe it. It's at the very least distorted, if not fake. And if you see Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson showing up claiming police brutality, it's probably not the strongest case of police brutality, and they're trying to break people down along racial lines. Instead of concentrating, as you said, on the issue, there should be congressional hearings on police abuse of everyone. It doesn't break down along color lines. There may be a disproportionate number of black people that have been abused by the cops, but the race shouldn't be the factor. It's what was going on there. What was the officer justified? And in very many cases, they're not.
Well, again, the national conversation was, you literally had Fox News, MSNBC commentators asking why you had police running around dressed like G.I. Joe, where do the cops really need the equipment they need? Why were they being militarized? Why is there this overreactive nature to go from 0 to 90 and escalate a situation? There's escalation of force, and they were jumping levels. They were there were people that were being shot that if they could have tased them. Like, even if you saw video footage, they could have been tased the individual, but no, they shot them. They shot and killed them. There was no need to do it. And it went, like you said, it went from it covered the gambit. I mean, there were black people, there were Latinos, there were Asian people, there were white people, there were little skater kids, little old Jewish grandmas. It didn't matter who it was. People were getting messed with, beaten, shot, run over. One guy was running from the cops on a motor vehicle thing. I think it was a stolen car or something. And he got out of the car, and the cop ran him down and killed him.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was down here in Florida. It was just like 3-4 years ago.
You never see, you never see though ever. You never see a police using excessive force on a Blood or a Crip or a Hell's Angel or a real life Goodfellow, a real criminal type. They're scared of them. Apparently, it's always somebody in a wheelchair, some innocent young girl that they're dragging along by her hair and kicking and sometimes even raping, little skateboarder kid. Little kids of all types. Like I said, in one case there was a naked, I don't know why she was naked, a naked 11-year-old autistic girl wandering around the streets or something, and the officer felt threatened and tasered her. So if you can't handle something like that, you shouldn't be in law enforcement, and the management over you should instantly recognize that. I'm sorry, we've had cases in our area where they shot an off-duty policeman, shot and killed some kids that were running out on an IHOP bill of like $20. I mean, that's not excessive. Do we really want them doing that? But considering, that we just had the first case of a robot, targeting and killing someone. I mean, it's kind of the drone syndrome where there's, why wait for a trial? I mean, it's not determined if they're innocent or guilty or go through the legal niceties. Let's just kill them. And since we already have Hillary Clinton saying we saw, he died, and Obama saying I'm good at killing people, and everybody bragging about killing. It's, really no one seems to care at this point. I mean, we've really become a totally messed up country.
Well, we've become desensitized since 9/11, especially with the proliferation of first-person shooter games. Before 9/11, most of those games were, if they were out, if there were any, which there were a few, but they were like, monster-based, space-based, things like like Halo or something, or you had stuff that was World War II, lots of battles, lots of video games focused on the invasion of Normandy. They focused on the Pacific War, things like that. Even the European front, they fighting the Nazis. But they weren't focused on modern-day battles and or futuristic battles with very close ties to what's going on politically today, even if some of the names were changed. The countries involved were the same, but maybe the political leader's name was changed or whatever for the video game. Anyway, you have that programming and that proliferation of first-person shooter video games, which, don't fool yourself, ladies and gentlemen, that was done via the Pentagon, and it was done on purpose because they've known since back in World War I that there was a problem. And you can go read a book called On Killing by Lieutenant Dave Grossman, who I'm going to try to get on the show. Great book about actual killing and why people kill and how they do it, and to understand what I'm about to say. The reason I bring that up is because they've been researching for years, going back to World War I, on how to get people to shoot. Back in the day, they had more people not shooting and pretending to shoot than they actually had firing their weapons. So over the course of time, they've learned how to manipulate soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on how to shoot at another human and kill it. They've taught us I can never say the word. They've desensitized us. Okay, they've taught us racism and hatred. They've taught us how to look at our fellow man and tear him or her down into a creature that is not human in our eyes and justifies us murdering them and taking their life. They've desensitized us to the act of killing our fellow man. And that's what those look, I've played video games my whole life, but I can tell you that's what they're doing. That's what those realistic first-person shooter video games do. A lot of kids that play them go and join the military. I've had people tell me, wow, man, it wasn't like Call of Duty when I got into the Marines and I saw combat the first time. No, it's not, because your friend gets shot next to you and there is no reset button. He doesn't come back. They don't explain that part. They only show certain things because they're programming you to do what they need you to do. It's manipulation of society. And that's what's going on with this racist crap. So you see both sides are getting fed. Like you said, they're feeding the cops. They're getting the cops all scared. Oh, my God, everybody hates you. And they have them believing they're in their own class. It's them versus everybody else. And then they change the narrative of police brutality to racism. That way now everybody was coming together and saying, hey man, what the hell? Now they split everybody back up. Oh, and just in time for the election. So the Democrats are, oh, you're racist, and the Republicans are, oh, well, slash conservatives or the liberals. They're supporters of the police state. I have people that were libertarians, Donald, that are now like, oh, well, I think it's great, after Ferguson that they had those MRAPs. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, what if you were rioting? Oh, but we wouldn't riot. Oh, but wait, what? How do you say that? How are you? It's amazing. It's amazing how well that they are well versed and how efficiently they can manipulate society that fast. Because, I mean, everybody was coming together, they saw that, and they put the brakes on that. And it's been since Ferguson. It was right around, and I'm not saying Ferguson was a false flag or something like that. I'm saying they took a situation, and via the media and the government itself, they manipulated the hell out of it in order to take the narrative of, why do the cops have MRAPs? Why are they shooting and killing and beating everybody? Like Russell Means said, welcome to the reservation. Everybody is in the same boat. The whole country is the reservation. The whole country is the FEMA camp, so to speak, right? Yeah. Why is all this going on? And suddenly the narrative has changed. And that's what happened. And they are masters at manipulation. We have about 7.5 minutes left, and I want to give you the floor. I want to bring up one more subject from your book, so we have to deviate a little bit, because I promised I would bring this up. But Obama's body count, most people have no idea about this. They don't know about the Chicago bathhouse murders or any of that stuff. I'm sure most people have no idea about probably 3/4 of the things that have been connected to Obama's past. So we have about 7 minutes left. I'm going to give you the floor. I'll stop you when you get close to the break. But Obama's body count leading up to his presidency now. I mean, he's been a politician for a short period of time, relatively. So pick it up wherever you want and go with it. It's all you.
Okay. Well, yeah, Obama is no different really in that regard than the Clintons or both Bushes. He does have a body count. And, people have demonized any criticism of Obama, not only as being racist, but they say you're a truther, a birther, as just like 9/11 truthers are truthers, and they mean that derisively. I don't know why being a truther is a bad thing, but in the case of Obama, we know that he had at least 5 different Social Security numbers, and that's not a conspiracy theory. They pretty much admit that, and I don't know anybody outside of crime or intelligence that wouldn't. Why would you need more than one Social Security number? The story on that is in the book, but Obama's body count, certainly the church he went to, where you had the 2 young black men that both died mysteriously, and I believe I had the quote from the mother of one of them in there, who certainly thinks there was something fishy involved. There's a whole backstory there, but I find the 2 most notable examples that I can think of. One is, and they both could have been written into a science fiction movie. One was Andrew Breitbart, who was a pretty typical right-wing journalist. He towed the line a lot, but he went a little farther right, I think, than most of them, and he certainly hated Obama. And he makes this pronouncement that I've got this video of Obama from his college days, because I don't know how far down the rabbit hole some people go with Obama, but there's a whole school of thought that something's missing in Obama's background. It's not just the birther, but there seems to be very little known about his background, and curiously, they've had Harvard professors talk about no one remembers him. How do you not remember a guy who went on to become the first black president of the United States? And I even have a quote from one of the history professors in the book that talks about every notable politician who came through Harvard who took my class. I don't remember Barack Obama. But at any rate, Andrew Breitbart makes this, ominous pronouncement. I've got this tape, it's gonna blow the lid off of Obama's past at Harvard, and then he drops dead at 42, 43 years old the next day. And then, for good measure, the coroner dies mysteriously not long after that. One of the main witnesses disappears mysteriously. Then later he returns, but these are the kind of things that are like bad movie scripts. Except it's real, and I don't know how many people actually saw that video. I was anxious to see whatever video they released of it, and it's an innocuous thing, but one thing curious about it is it was a speech that Obama gave at Harvard, and I believe it was Professor Gates, who was considered a black kind of a radical figure at that time, and I guess Obama was defending him. But what is curious about the speech, if you can ever find the video online somewhere, I urge people to watch it, because it's not like no other speech I've ever seen where the camera is not focused on the speaker, a young Barack Obama, very much at all. Kind of pans around the crowd and goes everywhere. You hear him talking in the background, and then you kind of see him from a distance. There are no close-ups, and it kind of feeds into this mystery of, where did Obama come from? But at any rate, the other one was journalist Michael Hastings, who wrote for Rolling Stone, and again, in true conspiratorial fashion, he sends out emails to people saying, hey, I've got to go underground, I'm onto a really hot story, kind of infers that he could be in danger, and then he runs into a tree at high speed and his car bursts into flames and he's gone. It's like, and this is what I talk about the press. This is Rolling Stone magazine he writes for. It used to be considered back in the 70s and 80s cutting edge, and I don't think it ever was really, but it still has that reputation. So you would think that if one of your employees makes a pronouncement like that and then dies in a very odd way like that, you would think you would want to investigate it, but there was nothing. And I believe his widow, made some pronouncements about, cutting down conspiracy theories. There's a lot of the surviving members of these families, unfortunately, do. I don't know if they're bought off or they just don't want to go there. I don't know. If it was one of my family members, I would want to know what happened, and I'd be suspicious about it. But even then, most people, I remember watching the videos of it too, and just for rabbit hole sake, to go down the rabbit hole, if you get a chance to watch some of the video of, I don't know if it's still online or not, after Michael Hastings' crash, you'll find what I would call one of these really out of place figures that don't seem to fit, a kind of a disconnected figure. There's a rabbi that's at this, for some reason the fire department doesn't come right away. And there's a rabbi that is, in this, I think it was like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, some kind of in full regalia, that's sitting out with what looks like a professional fire hose and is spraying it at the car. And then the fire department does show up, and they just kind of sit there and let the rabbi keep doing it. So those are like the bad Hollywood type of things that we would later see in things like Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing and on to the most recent shootings, the Minnesota shooting. If you watched some of that with the woman Facebooking live in the back seat, it's. I try not to get, again, too out there with that, but I can't help but be suspicious of it. But Obama has a lot of I describe all the deaths in the book. There's another woman who died very mysteriously. I think her car caught fire or something in the garage. I forget the exact details, but they're really, people don't tend to die like that generally, and hidden history is full of these kinds of unnatural deaths, from Nelson Rockefeller's private secretary accidentally falling from a high-story window of a building. I mean, really, how many people die like that?
Donald, I gotta cut us off because we're gotcha. Out of time. But amazing interview, ladies and gentlemen. You need to go get Donald's book, Hidden History. I promise you will not be disappointed. Donald, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amazing interview, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to have Donald back on because one show certainly just will not be enough with him. Anyway, we are out of time tonight. Go get his book, Hidden History. I promise, as I said, you will not be disappointed. As I always tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the solutions to our problems are an inside job. Go be the heroes I know you all are. I'll catch you all again live next week. I'm out. I love you all.